Hello everyone and welcome to today's webcast, Why Hybrid Working is Here to Stay and the Role You Will Play. Brought to you by CIO Australia, Insight and Microsoft. I'm Byron Connolly, the Editor-in-Chief at CIO Australia, and I'm going to be your host for today. Now, the COVID pandemic has shifted the way people think about their work lives. Lockdowns and restrictions have given rise to a hybrid work model that is most certainly here to stay. Work environments are changing dramatically, and so too is the role of the senior technology and digital leader. As businesses adapt to hybrid working, CIOs are being asked to deploy the technologies that will support these environments and meet their organisation's transformation objectives for years to come. Our speakers today will discuss the impact hybrid working will have on your organisation in the next 5 years and why your role is so critical to success. They'll also talk about how your organisation can embrace hybrid and multi-cloud models as a foundation for work environments, IT and application modernisation, the need to efficiently manage cloud estates, as well as the importance of addressing cybersecurity impacts that can threaten your organisation. So to set the scene, I'd like to introduce Louise Francis, and Louise is Country Manager at IDC New Zealand. And she's going to discuss the need for leadership to support a permanently hybrid workforce at a time when skills are in short supply. Louise will talk about how Australia and New Zealand businesses are building a truly hybrid work experience, the challenges they've identified and where they're investing this year. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you, Byron. Hopefully technology, oops, I've already stuffed it up. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Byron, and thank you for asking me to join you today. I think this is a great topic, and I think we're at a crossroads right now about hybrid working. So I think this is a good point to sort of stop, take a deep breath and think really about what hybrid working is going to look like in your organisation. We're definitely at a crossroads, and the decisions that you make about your organisation are really going to affect how successful your hybrid working model is going to be in the years to come. As a result of this mass migration to hybrid working over the last couple of years, we've seen the emergence of new and dynamic empowered teams. And these are going to form the core of the future enterprise going forward. They are looking, businesses are looking at the benefits, but they're not actually looking back to see what are the things that we should be doing going forward. So yes, what worked 2 years ago is probably okay right now, but going forward, do we really want to look at what the future of hybrid working looks like? We've seen this rapid shift as a result of a number of factors, and one of the core factors behind this has been the initial investment in digital transformation that occurred prior to the pandemic. A number of businesses that we talked to over the last couple of years said everything that we've done so quickly in our organisation around hybrid working has been a result of that digital transformation investment. But what we're also finding is managers are now starting to ask about, how do I manage this workforce? It's becoming increasingly difficult. It was quite simple when everyone was working from home. We knew what we needed to do. We knew what we needed to do very quickly, and it was relatively stable. And then when people move back into a full office environment, everyone is familiar with that process. But it's when the two areas converge into hybrid working that we're finding businesses really struggling going forward. So laying a hybrid working model over the top of old processes, old ways of leading an organisation and your teams is not going to work. It's going to require a rethink and a rewiring about leadership practices and the whole concept of what the culture of the organisation is. So we've done a number of surveys, obviously, over the last couple of years. And one of the things that we asked last year after 18 months of the pandemic is, what are the changes that are occurring in your workplace that you believe are going to endure post-pandemic? And you can see here that remote and hybrid work models are becoming embedded into the part of accepted work practices. That looks like a very high number, 45%, but it actually lags the rest of the world. So, you know, there is a little bit of hesitancy occurring in Australian and New Zealand organisations. We're also seeing the formation of the physical workspace, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that further on. But we're seeing businesses think about how they're going to instrument that physical workspace, how are they going to connect together. And you're going to hear the phrase about the intelligent workspace over the next couple of years. So these two areas are core things that are behind the hybrid working decisions that are being made today. But there's one just a little bit further down here, and this is this intelligent digital workspaces. And this is when we see all those models start to merge together. We see the connectivity, we see the access to resources. And this is actually about making businesses work much better, working across different locations, different time zones, and different devices. There are a number of concepts that you're going to start to hear about the intelligent digital workspace, including the need for digital parity or device parity in the workspace. We also find that businesses are really struggling with the concept of when you have a team in the office versus a team at home, how you create that parity and equity of employee experience. So we're seeing a lot of activity going on in these particular areas. There's not one area where there is a weakness in terms of investment and change in the organisation. In fact, the one at the bottom is what we expected at the start of the pandemic was going to be around the access to mobile devices and the use of corporate resources through mobile devices. That's now at the bottom of the list. So it's really still important to a lot of organisations, but that is starting to fade in terms of importance. When we hear about the intelligent digital workspace, one of my colleagues in the United States talked about, she could describe it as the connective tissue that brings hybrid working together. So thinking about, it's not just about the technology, it's not just about the policy in the organisation, it's all these things combined that gets the most out of hybrid working. So recently we did a number of predictions around the hybrid workplace, and I think this is really a critical one. We're predicting that within a year, that digital transformation and business volatility is going to drive 70% of large organisations in Australia and New Zealand to deploy remote or hybrid first work models. This is going to redefine work processes, and it's going to also be about engaging diverse talent pools. So Byron was talking a bit earlier about the skill shortage and about, we talk a lot about talent retention. And the hybrid workplace and the hybrid first models are going to play a key role in talent retention, but also gaining new talent into the organisation. So 70%, that seems pretty big number. But when we did a survey in February this year, we actually found that 78% of Australian and New Zealand organisations are already in the process of or have adopted this hybrid first work model. You can see the dark bar there is about a third. So those are the ones that are fully embedded into and committed to that hybrid first work model. The ones in the lighter green is about 44%, and they're the ones who are saying that we're in the process of it. We've still got to work out a few details, but we're fully on board and we expect to be there within a year's time. The lightest green are the ones who are the ones sitting on the fence. So they're the ones who haven't really decided yet if a hybrid first work model is right for them and what they need to do around it. Only 2% said that they weren't thinking about hybrid first at all, which is quite incredible when you consider that we were not really talking about hybrid work models 2 years ago. So there are a number of challenges that still remain for the successful adoption of these hybrid first models. And these are the questions that just you need to be aware of and start to ask yourself about what's happening in your organisation, because they're going to affect that connectivity. They're going to affect that connective tissue that brings the hybrid work model together. Cross-functional leadership, because hybrid work is across different parts of the organisations, different teams, different skill sets, we're seeing businesses really struggle with how do you create a hybrid first work model that fits with the whole organisation. So there are going to be some parts of the team that are going to be working remotely most of the time. Some teams are going to be on premise most of the time, and some are going to be a mixture of the two. So how do you create a model and policies and processes in place to deal with that? The other one is about this equitable resource access, and you're going to keep hearing about digital equity. You're going to hear about employee parity. We've had a number of discussions recently with CIOs, and the discussion is around, if I've got a team who's in the office, they tend to be more engaged, they have better access to resources, they have the better access to better equipment. How do I create that equitable access outside of the organisation? And it's more than the devices and the technology itself. It's about the office home office setup. Is it adequate? Is it safe for the employees? Do they have the right equipment for a home office? So there are a number of design factors that need to go into place. The culture of trust is really important. When we talk about hybrid working, the culture of trust is a key part of leadership that is critical to the success of hybrid working. We need to build this culture of trust to support a work from anywhere model. And this is something that a lot of leaders really struggle with, is if the employees aren't in the office, aren't within their eyesight, how do you create a culture of trust in the organisation? Hybrid collaboration, we're all been using collaboration tools over the last 2 years. We've got new ones that we've been using. The tools that we were using 2 years ago have vastly improved as a result of the move to working from home. But a lot of organisations are now starting to look at how do you start to consolidate that? How do you get the best out of those collaboration tools? If we've got people who are working in the office and working remotely, is using the same tool for that collaboration the right thing to do? So those are the questions that are faced by organisations. And line of business management, training for those first line managers to support hybrid teams. Some line of business managers have never been in a situation where employees have been in a hybrid work model. So again, if you're looking at right at the start for that cross-functional leadership, it's that line of business that is the next on the tier. And it's also about the skills. I haven't included it in the top 5 above because it actually wasn't asked in this question. But when we actually look at what businesses are doing over 2022, we asked them, what skills are you looking for in the organisation? And surprisingly, 61% said the management of remote hybrid workforce is the most critical skill that they intend to hire or develop in the next 12 months. So we're seeing businesses really redefining teams, looking at reinventing models and rethinking how they lead those teams. That's a massive number, and you will be fighting for those skills. You will be fighting for those capabilities within your organisation. If they're not in your HR processes at the moment, they should be incorporated. Those metrics need to be incorporated to ensure that you're effectively managing a hybrid workforce. So physical workplaces can't be an afterthought. Every time we talk about hybrid workforces or workplaces, we keep talking about remote workers, but it's the physical workplaces that we're starting to see some real changes happening. We're seeing a redesign of teams. We're seeing a way that employees engage in a physical environment is going to change. They've been 2 years in an environment where they're working from home, they've learnt new ways to do things, and they have expectations. And if you are looking for talent, that's scarce resources in the market, and I know how difficult it is to hire skills at the moment, start looking at redesigning your spaces. You can see here that most organisations across Australia and New Zealand are redesigning to a certain extent. Some are just tweaking the existing spaces and making it fit and safe for the hybrid workforce, but almost half are actually investing in new or entirely new facilities to adapt to those changes in the hybrid workforce. Only 2% said that they were making absolutely no changes at all. So that fits into those 2% who I said previously said that they weren't looking for a hybrid workforce model. So that's just a little bit about some of the trends that we're seeing at the moment. I know there's a lot more that we could talk about, but I think we can cover some of that in the discussions coming forward. But there are 3 things that I want to point out that you need to be aware of that are going to be like the crosswinds that you're going to face around hybrid workforce in 2022. So one thing is that uncertainty is certain. We've seen the great resignation, but we're also starting to talk about the great migration as employees, borders start to open up, employees start to look for opportunities elsewhere. We're seeing economic uncertainty, but also more recently geopolitical uncertainty. That is not going to change over the next year. We're going to see the development of what looks great in a hybrid work first framework. We're going to see this supply chain uncertainty continue for the foreseeable future, and of course the costs of hybrid working. Because nobody has a perfect model, everyone is still experimenting with hybrid work, the costs are still an unknown factor. The next one is dynamic work conditions. So there are going to be new risks, and I think we're going to be probably talking about this a bit later about the security risks involved with hybrid workforces. One of the key areas of investment is around secure remote management of workforces and secure devices in a remote workplace. We're going to see much more work around training and support for hybrid workforces. So we're starting to see those models come through. There's going to be some real investment for remote workspaces. So not just the physical environment in the office, but really thinking about what the home office looks like and how to get the best out of employees in that model. We're going to see hub and spoke models start to emerge. So this is about not necessarily an employee working in home, but working closer to where clients are. So you might find that you'll have clusters of employees working in different locations. And of course, automation is going to continue to be a big area of investment. And the third area is about this inclusive leadership style. So as I mentioned before, the leadership mindset is something that we really feel needs to be addressed. We need this culture of trust, and we need to think about areas such as onboarding of new employees. And finally, the other area is around talent recruitment. We need to really look at our workforces and understand what sort of skills we're looking for in this hybrid work model, and also how do we retain that talent. So that's a very brief overview of the hybrid workforce, and I know you'll have lots of questions, so I'm going to hand it back over to Byron now.
Thank you very much, Louise. And of course, Louise will be part of our panel following our next presentation. So if you do have questions, please put them in the box on the right-hand side of your screen there, and we'll do our best to get to them in the time that's been allocated. So thank you again, Louise, some great insights there. But we will move on now to our next speaker this morning is Dean Corcoran, who is Technology Strategy Chief Technology Officer for Partners at Microsoft. And Dean is going to now discuss what technology is doing, what it means to how people work, how it impacts productivity, as well as workplace culture as we look into the future of this hybrid workplace. So welcome, Dean.
Thank you, Byron, and thank you, Louise, for the great objective that you shared just before. There's a lot of that data that IDC's produced there or gathered. It definitely aligns with what Microsoft is seeing. So, look, I thought I'd take a little bit of a retrospective, I suppose, with this as we sort of look at, sometimes it's good to look back at the past to see where we've come from as we look towards what we could be doing in the future. So I've got some imagery here of the way work life used to be, and it's going, back over 100 years ago. It sort of sounds a bit crazy. I never considered 1915 to be over 100 years ago, but I've done the math, and it is. And we've got a very different world. So I suppose it's sort of the very early dawn of the information age, in that we're starting to see technology play a role in the way that organizations collaborate, the way that they produce content. Now, looking at some of the things in this photo, we see, the old banana telephone, very, very, antique today, and typewriters coming into the workplace. But of course, where information is stored, the knowledge or IP, the things that make the organization without the people, is all stored in filing cabinets and everything in the background there. And so if you can sort of think about the way work was back in 1915, you had to come to the office There was just, you know, all work was considered. It didn't matter what you did. All work was considered somewhere that you went in order to perform that particular duty, whether it was something out in the field or whether it was something in an office sort of scenario. As we move forward a little, we've gone a little bit too far here. Moving up, you know, another 50 years, what we're starting to see is sort of the dawn of a new information age. Now, some people might recognize what's happening here in this particular photo. This is an old telephone exchange. In the days before mobile phones, obviously, if you needed to make a phone call once upon a time, it wasn't so much about dialing a number, it was about picking up the handset and asking to be connected. And the operator that you spoke to was someone who was sitting at the exchange and physically pulled the plug out from your connection and connected you through to your destination. So every little socket on that board there was you know, a destination location, whether a destination city that had to be connected to another operator, or a destination actual address and destination phone number in an individual's phone somewhere. And in fact, this one's a little bit close to me because at the back there, that's actually my mother working in the exchange. And this was just prior to the exchange being completely replaced by an electronic exchange. So I think it was only within a year or so after this, there was no such thing as someone on the operator. You could actually dial the phone number of the person you'd like to get connected to. Now, as we move forward, you know, another 30 years, and all exchanges are digital. The workplace is this sort of a grey city, I suppose. We've got the dawn of mobility. And so if you needed to connect to someone, you had to learn how to use that desk phone, how to get, you know, a call that's coming in from reception or wherever it was, and how to get out to an outside line. You dialed the number of other people within the office. Everything was still pretty manual. In order to work, you still had to come to the office. We can still see a lot of paperwork and everything around. And so generally things that, you know, things haven't, in many ways, things sort of haven't changed from nearly 100 years before, or if we went back to that 1915 photo, and that people are still coming into the office. But keep in mind, the Nokia 2110, as it is there, was probably one of the pinnacle devices that allowed people to start moving around a lot more. Now, if you were someone who were out performing sales, in order to connect back to the office, you either had to find a phone booth before then, or have a very, very expensive sort of phone, or maybe, you know, as these little Nokia 5110 was my first mobile phone. As these started to become much more accessible, and the area where you could use them was something that was more practical, it allowed people to work more and more from outside of the office. But generally speaking, the culture was the same. But as we're starting to see, if we move up now just another 20 years, we see digital technology starting to come in and play much more of a role. And so at Microsoft, we saw this vision of moving from the space of everything being a place where you go to something that you do. So there was a bit of a phrase at Microsoft, which was, you know, work is something that I do, not a place that I go, because we could see that in an environment where we always had sort of ubiquitous access to connectivity, it was something that we could use to change the way that workplaces behaved and the way that people interacted and collaborated with one another. And so even here in Australia, at the previous Microsoft office at North Ryde, they completely changed the environment from that sort of grey city of different petitions that you saw in the previous photo, like office space, to the new, what we referred to as activity-based working, or some people refer to it as hot desking, and to demonstrate that we could actually save on real estate costs by allowing people to work in a more hybrid way. And some organizations started to get a bit of an idea that this was something they could actually do. Now, interestingly, it's not something that was universally accepted. We could sort of see many organizations still had a culture, including Microsoft, of, you know, going in and meeting people. And I would say, you know, a day in the office for me, you know, personally, gave me a lot of insight into the way the Microsoft machine worked, what other people were doing, and those types of things. But either way, regardless of how we set out the offices at the physical space, the laying of that technology definitely set us up to be able to pretty much just switch over coming that new event that took place. Oh, I've double clicked again. Excuse me a second. So, you know, in 2021, 22, it gets a little bit cliche hearing sort of, you know, the COVID situation and how everyone went to working from home. Generally speaking, organizations that had started to deploy and even if they were generally organizations where you went to the workplace to work, but used Teams or Zoom or Skype or whatever else it might be to interact and collaborate with other people, generally were quite well set up to move to a work from home environment. Many organizations had to then potentially buy equipment so people could work from home, because generally they still work obviously from the office, so all the equipment was at the office and people couldn't quickly get access to the technology they needed physically. But generally everyone started working to this new work from home. Now, keep in mind, I think the big take home from some of this is that we've now had 2 years of people working in the work from home environment. And so it hasn't been, at first there was a change, but then there was a psychological effect that took place with different people around the way that they like to work. So some of my personal conversations with other organizations range everything from, hey, at last I get to work the way that I want to work. I can work from home all the time and I'm allowed to do it, through to people still wanting to go back to the office and definitely, you know, can't wait to get back to the office. And then somewhere in between, where people who traditionally went to the office went, you know what, this has actually opened up my mind. I've spent 2 years doing this and this isn't so bad. Now, we performed a lot of research during this time, and in particular with Microsoft employees, and that's what we see the graph on the slide there. We had a lot of people already working from home. And during the COVID pandemic and lockdown and isolation restrictions and things like that, what we saw was that people from work from home saw a change in the way that they worked as well. So there was a change in the way that they worked, the way that they behaved, and the way that they interacted with others. Also, naturally, the people who used to work in the office are now working from home in addition to those other changes. So they had a more pronounced change because they needed to then work from home, but then also accommodate the same change in working environment that the people who that everyone's experiencing, including the people who are used to working from home, are already well set up. And so sort of looking at some of that data, some of those statistics, what we found was that whilst prior to pandemic, this particular data I'm showing here is American data, but whilst prior to pandemic, about 5% of Americans work from home, no more than 5% of Americans work from home more than 3 days a week. Once we saw sort of restrictions come into play, up to 37% of people working from home and performing much less commuting. But naturally, those other effects were things like school closures and overall general stress levels to do with other things that might have been pandemic related or otherwise. But if we look at the way teams were interacting, what we did see that we saw less inter-team collaboration. So if you have multiple teams spread across the whole organization that normally would collaborate with one another, that happened less. What we also saw was that there was less new connections being formed between people who are working from home exclusively. But we also saw an increase in the amount of unscheduled work that was taking place and an increased intra-team collaboration. So generally people stuck to what they knew a lot more and were less exposed to the outer circle, if you will, of employees and other teams. And so those were things to sort of take into account into the way that people were being productive. Now, you can draw lots of conclusions as to why that happened. Was it because of remote work? Was it because everyone was doubling down on the core of what they needed to do with their focused groups and didn't do anything more aspirational? And that's definitely the case with many organizations who had to quickly set up, you know, online communication and collaboration tools and things like that. What's really worth having a look at is just released last March was the Microsoft 2022 Work Trend Index that outlines 5 urgent trends across what we're seeing across the generally workforce, and this is an external study across over 31 countries, over 31,000 people, with lots of different productivity signals that we get from our productivity tooling. So Microsoft 365, Teams, Outlook, SharePoint, just all the Office tools generally give a lot of telemetry of using the online tools that we can use to see how people are working generally at a very high level. But what we're sort of seeing is that employees today have this new worth it equation. 53% of employees say they're more likely to prioritize health and well-being over work than previously. So they're becoming less work focused and more well-being and health focused. In particular, the great reshuffle or the great resignation, or whatever we want to call it, is going to continue. 53% of Gen Z and millennials are likely to consider changing employers in the year ahead. Managers also feel wedged between leadership and employees. Many organizations do have return to physical work, full-time in-person work plans ahead, but they're not necessarily feeling that they have the support from their upper management, and they don't have the resources to deal with what that might mean if their workforce doesn't necessarily want to do that. Also, too, if people are going to an office environment, it needs to be for a good reason. Everyone's probably going to have their own versions of what that good reason is to go to a physical work environment in a hybrid world. And so, in fact, right now, and I can say I personally have this challenge, I still haven't totally worked out when and why I need to go to work in what situations, right? And the data backs it up, 38% of hybrid employees say their biggest challenge is knowing when and why to go to the office. Also, what we're seeing is that building social capital in an organization is very, very different. In many organizations, there is sort of a social quotient, if you will, for going into the workplace. The connections you have, everything that's not work but still happens in the workplace, that type of thing, those relationships that you forge are going to be very, very different. And many organizations have people that stay there because they just love the people they work with. They love that interaction. They love that flow that they get when they're in the workplace. In a hybrid world, that's very, very different. And so how do we move into an environment where we can create a new type of social collateral that is very inclusive for all the different types of employees? So look, you could look at this from the perspective of, is this some sort of bleak future where people are completely isolated? There's not much opportunity. There's not much, there's a lot of stress and fatigue. That's what some of the initial data sort of said. But as we sort of move into this sort of new world of work, and I love, some of the phrasing and terminology that's starting to set in that Louise showed before in that data that's showing this new form of work that we're getting, they're moving to. Look, there are technology ways that we can start to look at how the workforce is behaving, what they need, how they're collaborating. Are they collaborating only intra-team, outside of team? Do we start feeding into the organization planned organic activities or planned catch-ups, whether they be virtual or in person or otherwise? And Microsoft's done a lot of that over, during the pandemic, where we have coffee catch-ups that we throw in every other week, where people can just jump on a call and hang out if they wish, and then periodically we go out for lunch, that type of thing, in different locations, so people get that in-person connection, and it's whatever works for those different people at different times, just to start to create some of that serendipity that can happen. And I know just from being in the workplace just recently, I managed to catch up with someone I hadn't seen for a long time who gave me some information that there's no other way I would have got that from that person, because I never would have planned to catch up with them otherwise, and that information was very, very useful for my daily job. So looking at the tooling we've got within, in the Microsoft productivity suite, and I don't want to be too sort of product specific, but what we're seeing is with all the telemetry we get from the digital collaboration tooling, it gives us the ability to start to look at how we can create a better environment that improves well-being for the people within the organization, whether it be personal well-being based on that individual's flow, or whether it be overall group, overall team well-being as well. And so the image you see there is just a little demo that from within an organization's view of how the collaboration, how the teams are interacting together. where they're going to get information for different activities, things like that. And so what we really see, Microsoft's official position, if you will, is, to ensure that organizations have what they need to help both the organizations and the employees achieve what they want to achieve. And that's embodied in the Microsoft company mission. And so what we're doing now is not necessarily just making things like Teams so you can connect like we are right now in a real-time scenario, video and audio, that type of thing, but also have the collaboration, learning experiences, well-being, interaction, insights into who we should be connecting with that might have information that, how do we create serendipity using digital technologies? Okay, so that would normally happen through exclusively a workplace environment and a very innately sort of human interactions, but how can we use the data and the technology to lead people down a path of a daily flow and a daily experience that enables them to do the best work they possibly can, both in a human way, in an objective way, and an impact way for the organizations that they work for. So, what does the future hold? As it's not just going to be Teams meetings or Zoom meetings or go-to meetings that we're going to be connecting on. It's not always just going to be video. Where you may have heard of things like the metaverse and Web3 and those types of technologies. Now you can be skeptical, if you will, that all those things are going to find a place when they get that killer app, when that forcing function happens. With things like online collaboration tooling, the forcing function was COVID for many people, and so suddenly we've turned our videos on a heck of a lot more than we used to. But things like using holograms, augmented reality. There's another way of looking at this as well. Some of it isn't just a case of that information worker in the office and what they're going to do, but how can we get some of the technology we're getting very used to using now in the office and take it out to roles that are traditionally out in the field, out on the street, out in the environment somewhere, and allow people in the office to get a first-hand experience as well. So having meetings, creating meeting environments, creating interaction and collaboration environments that are inclusive of people regardless of where they come from, their ability requirements and things like that as well. As was mentioned by Louise, or inferred by Louise as well, there's actually a workforce out there that now that couldn't physically get into work, that now has been given their day, if you will, to be able to stay at home for whatever reason, whether they've got ability reasons for having to stay at home or otherwise, that now we can use their intellectual abilities to contribute to the organization. And so regardless of the time, place requirement, I think there's generally a better future coming with the new technologies that are coming down the track and starting to get embedded into the collaboration tool. So hopefully it gives you a little bit of an inspiration without getting too specific. And with that, I might just pass back to Byron. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean, and I'll get you to stay on the line because we have a panel coming up soon. I'll get Louise Francis to join us again. Louise, if you can turn your camera and your sound on. Again, Dean, that was very insightful. Thank you very much. And I'll also like to take this opportunity to introduce Martin Harris, who is Asia Pacific Modern Work Technology Solution Lead at Insight. Hello, Martin.
Hi, Byron.
All right, thanks for joining us. But before we do get into the questions for the panel, we've got a bit of time. So if you do have questions, please put them in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen there. We're going to do a little poll. It's a multiple choice question, and just select one, and then we'll have a bit of a chat about the results afterwards. Now, the question is, what post-COVID work arrangements do you have in place for your staff? So there's 4 options. Please select one. Hybrid work, where staff alternate between the office and other locations. Office full-time, staff are back in the office almost every day. Permanent remote working, staff are given the option to work from home. Or finally, no formal decision made yet. So we'll give people 10 to 15 seconds to answer that. So please just select one. All right, let's see if we can get the results up on screen. All right, so this is not unusual. 71%, so the majority said that there's hybrid work. Interesting that 12% haven't made a formal decision. I I like 1 in 10 coming back to the office almost every day, and 7%, which is what I expected, have permanent remote working. Martin, have you got any thoughts on this? Does any of this surprise you? I mean, clearly hybrid work is the go.
Yeah, I don't think there's any great surprises there. It's quite a strong majority for hybrid work. I'd like to focus in on those 12% who haven't made a decision yet.
Sure.
And I'm wondering what is actually preventing that, whether it's simply a case of we're waiting to see how things pan out. But that to me is probably the most interesting element of that poll result.
Yeah. Louise, do you have any comments on that? I like the fact that 7% have told staff that they don't ever have to come back to the office. I guess there's positives and negatives for that, isn't there? As we've been discussing.
Yeah, I don't think there's any surprises at all with that poll. I mean, that aligns to all the results that we've been seeing. In fact, it even pretty closely aligned to that slide I had at the start of my presentation. So I think there is still a little bit of indecision in some organisations, and I am not surprised that there is still some people sitting on the fence. And it's more sort of what direction do we go in? Are we, there's a little bit of a deer in the headlights sort of thing. Are we going to make the right decision?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's tough. I mean, we had 10% say that they're asking people to come back to work now. I think given what's happened with the millennials coming into the workforce, obviously, that it's going to be tough going forward to tell people to come into the office every day from now on. I'm pretty sure about that. I think that number will be down to close to 0 at some point soon too. All right, well, let's get into the discussion. Martin, we've heard from Louise, we've heard from Dean, lots of good insights there. Here's an opportunity for you to be part of the discussion now. Have you got some really quick and simple practical actions, I guess, that people watching today can put in place to improve hybrid working across their organisations, given that, it's clear that that's the way we're going?
Sure, yeah. If people are looking for quick wins, then a good starting point is to look at the collaboration systems that you're using and have a think about the default settings that you've got there and whether you can improve those to more target hybrid working. So some simple examples in a Microsoft Outlook and Teams world is that you can configure your meetings to automatically always add online links. So when someone's creating a new meeting, they don't need to think about whether all of the participants are going to be in the office that day. It'll always create an online link and people can click that and have that available to them. Another example is that you can set meetings that they will end 5 minutes before a half hour or 10 minutes before an hour, so that everyone will have a little bit of time to have short breaks and regroup between consecutive sessions, which is a really big advantage if that's possible. I think it's also really good to set some guidelines around good hybrid work practices and etiquette, and then communicate them out. So send emails to your staff and post them around meeting rooms. And I know this is something that Microsoft do internally. So examples of that kind of etiquette, and there's lots of really good articles online about this. There's standard meeting etiquette rules, making sure meetings are necessary, they have agendas, moderators, someone's taking minutes and following up the action items, but also specifically around hybrid meetings, encouraging staff to use features that allow your remote participants to be fully involved in that meeting. So use online whiteboards rather than physical whiteboards if you can. Use the live text chat to create multiple channels. Take digital notes in the context of the meeting rather than scribbling them on paper, and use meeting recordings and transcriptions and other features so that people can come back to the meeting later if that's useful. And the last one that I'll throw in is that because your staff are using these collaboration software tools all of the time in a hybrid world, and it's the primary interface through which staff are connecting with their peers and within the organisation, it's really important that they can use those tools effectively. So send out links to online videos and tutorials that are freely available, because even small improvements to how people use those tools can make a massive difference to their productivity and also to their quality of life. So hopefully, amongst that, there's some good ideas that people can take away as a quick win.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much for that, Martin. I'll take some of that on board myself too. Now, one of the potentially negative impacts of remote working, which will be obviously permanent for some people, as we've seen, is heightened cybersecurity risks across your organisation. I mean, people are working outside the network perimeter. They're distracted more when they're at home, say, for instance. thoughts on, and I might start with you on this, Dean, what organisations need to do now to improve their security posture to provide more protection as workers actually move away from physical offices? Have you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's been a big concern because generally organizations and people sort of think in a security mindset of sort of boundaries, right, or perimeters. You know, in the tech world, you've got your firewall, right, and it's in many respects it's a bit of a flawed thinking because everyone knows the story of the Trojan horse, right? So you know, and basically if you've got a wall and it's your only defense, then there's only, you know, it sort of goes into that you know, if that defense fails, then all is out. And so generally we follow a concept today which is referred to as zero trust, and that is generally every environment that the employee is in is potentially an environment that is open to be compromised. And so whether that be the actual machine that the person's using or otherwise, and then center all the security around the identity of the individual and around using tooling to understand the data that the individuals are using. So no one should have access to every piece of data across the organization, and it should be only available at the right time for the right purpose and things like that. And so things like personally identifiable information and sensitive documents can actually be classified. We've got a heap of tooling, you know, not just Microsoft, but you know, other organizations as well have heaps of tooling available for you to look for types of information that is high risk if it becomes compromised, and to ensure that it only gets exposed in certain ways. And so, look, this is sort of the tip of the iceberg conversation, you know, sort of a question, Byron. It can go down to some pretty deep stuff, but generally, identity and the data are the main things. And once you work around that, generally, you know, hybrid becomes less of a challenge because, you know, when people log on, you know, they use multiple ways to identify that they're not just someone who knows their password, that type of thing.
Yeah, I think the training's probably is important in this new hybrid environment too. I mean, organisations need to be doing cybersecurity training more often than they have, I guess, in the past before COVID hit, before we found ourselves in this situation. But you are right, it is a rabbit hole. Cybersecurity is only going to get more complex and more difficult to manage as time goes on. So it really is a big issue for a lot of CIOs out there. It's one of the number one ones. So we are running out a little bit of time, but I do want to ask a question about culture because, you know, it's difficult, I would assume, to completely change your culture overnight and create a hybrid work environment that's, you know, that people are comfortable in working in and is conducive to good communication. Keen to get everyone's thoughts just quickly on what can be done from a people, technology and organisational perspective to ensure that the culture is maintained, because we're at risk of losing good culture as we move to these hybrid work environments. What are your thoughts? Martin, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I think a couple of things that will help for a transition if you're still kind of stuck in the old school mindset is to have your leaders working hybrid and demonstrate your leaders being effective working from home and in the office. So for example, if you've got a town hall meeting, maybe some of your leaders are speaking in the office and others are connecting in from home. And that top-down demonstration of effective working is really important so that everybody can see the leaders are doing it. It's okay, I'm not going to get in trouble. We expect everybody's going to work this way. It's also good to communicate examples where you've got teams that have been working in a hybrid manner and are effectively doing so. They're kicking goals and you know, tell those stories and make sure that the people are aware that's happening. And another one that we're starting to see now is that organisations are looking at how to do social events and bring people together in a hybrid manner. And just within Insights, a few weeks ago, we had a pizza night. We had a town hall meeting where we had pizza, and you either went into the office and had pizza with everyone there, or you know, we were sending out vouchers and people were getting pizzas delivered to their house, and you know, we're all eating pizza and chatting about stuff, work and not work at the same time. So you know, people are exploring what can work there, and I think organisations that are trying are going to hit a good balance much sooner than organisations that are waiting to see how it's going to pan out.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Louise, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the other thing to remember is the culture of the organisation will need to change and evolve as a result of hybrid or remote working. You think about remote workers, you know, anyone, even if they are coming into the office 3 or 4 days a week, they are spending some of their time outside of the office. Do they have the right support? You know, they're going to probably feel isolated and stressed as a result of the changes that they're undergoing. So thinking about that, and what we're saying to businesses is, if you really want to understand the impact of hybrid working on your team and its productivity and the outcomes for the organisation, look at what the metrics were prior to COVID-19. You know, how productive was the team then? What sort of innovation rates were you seeing? Figure those business metrics then. Then what happened when everyone was working from home? So how did those metrics change in that environment? And then look at what's happening now in a hybrid environment. So where were the strengths in each area, and start to use those examples going forward in how you create those models.
Yeah. Dean, a final comment before we wrap up on culture.
Really great points from Martin and Louise, and Martin mentioned a lot of things that Microsoft does as well, just internally. Obviously, we try to live the way that we walk the walk as well as talk the talk, I suppose. Yeah, look, I think work has to have a bit of a purpose, right? Beyond just that daily grind. And at Microsoft, and just sort of sharing the way we work internally, and we don't make a big deal of it, nearly everybody has a passion project. Everyone has an altruistic thing that they work on, whether it be, you know, diversity, inclusion, or you know, homelessness or environment or something like that. And it's really well communicated amongst, it's not just, you know, work stays at work and home stays at home. There's more of a fusion. Like, the fact is, we're working in hybrid environments. People are bringing their home to their work, and their work is coming home. And so that culture needs to go beyond just the tooling. And so we are actively and encourage, and it needs not just be something you say, it needs to be really well supported by management. Next week, I've got a massive accessibility event that we're running that was originally just a small thing. Next thing we knew, the managing director of Microsoft Australia and New Zealand got wind of it and is involved, and we've got the Human Rights Commission, Disability Commissioner involved. It was supposed to be just, 30-person hack to help people who have disability or ability accessibility requirements, and now is involved a whole heap of different organisations and everything. So and it makes people feel like work isn't just for somebody else. It's actually a thing that contributes to the community. Everyone gets together for different reasons other than just trying to get their sales targets. So I think that transcends technology.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dean. Thanks, Louise, and thank you, Martin, for your insights and your thoughts today. We have a lot. There's been a lot of discussions around hybrid work. This has been a great one, but clearly we're going to be having more in the future. And I'd like to thank everybody who's tuned into this webcast today. We hope that you've learned something. We hope that you found the presentations compelling, and we'll see you again at the next one. So thank you, guys. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye for now.